Hello and welcome to the Keeping the Peace podcast with me, your host, Alexis Powell-Howard. Today I'm at the Priory HQ police station in Hull and we're talking about bereavement and loss. I'm joined by Sandy Powdrell, who's a health and wellbeing manager, and ACO, Assistant Chief Officer, Nancy Shackleton. So I think it would be good to start with to just get a sense of both of your roles and kind of where you fit in the organisation, really. If I come to you first, Sandy, what's your kind of role and remit?
Yes, so I work in the Occupational Health and Wellbeing Unit. I, as the Health and Wellbeing Manager, manage the wellbeing side of the unit, it's actually a really fun job to do. Mm-hmm. So I work though with the senior psychotherapists and the senior occ health nurse advisor who deal with the other aspects of all wellbeing. So my role really is to make sure that culturally within the organisation we are trying to change the culture to one of wellbeing and to show it's okay and allowed for people to care. So I have a number of activities that are across the force, but I also support all the local wellbeing boards in achieving the things that they want to achieve.
Okay, so quite a lot to do.
Yes.
Yes. And that cultural work's really interesting. I love all that kind of stuff. So it sounds like you love it, but it's really interesting as well at the same time.
It's really interesting. It's really important. I've historically dealt with I've worked in the force for a good 23 years. So from within people's services, which is where occupational health and wellbeing sits. I still will oversee some situations where the support maybe hasn't always been readily available, so we make sure and we service recover that to make sure that does happen. But yeah, it's interesting. It's in depth, and you only get to know a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. Nancy, I'm going to come to you. So just tell us a little bit about your role and your remit within Humberside.
Okay, so I'm one of the chief officers at Humberside Police. I'm the civilian member of staff, so I'm not a warranted police officer, and I look after 5 principal departments: the human resources or the people department, the money department, the IT department, the buildings department, and the car department.
So literally nothing standing unless you go.
A little bit like that. And I was really interested in today because I think there's both, as a senior manager, there's both a personal role that you have in bereavement and there's also a professional role that you have in bereavement. And I think the two are often intertwined about how you see things through your own personal lens. So really happy to be included on this. And I hope that for somebody listening, something that either Sandy or I say today makes them feel less alone.
Yeah, I mean, this is, just to put this into context really, this wasn't a podcast we planned to do today, was it? It was something we've been talking about as the day's gone on, and we decided that we would do this. So again, I hope, in line with what you're saying, Nancy, that this will be something that will help somebody. When I think specifically clicking on this podcast is because people have either a vested interest or they're managing people and they kind of want to know a bit more about how to do that well when we're looking at bereavement and loss. And having worked with a lot of cops and staff over the years, we've been talking today about how you deal with death every day in what you do for a living, and that's what happens in this organisation, isn't it? That's a big part of what you do. But when you're looking at it from a personal perspective, that's a whole other ball game.
Yeah, and I think in the police service we've almost got a culture that we try and save people from death in a way that in the medical profession perhaps death is part of it. They save some patients, they don't. I think there is a real heroism that is cultural in the police, that we try and save you from having something really bad happen, and when something really, really bad happens, we lose lives. So I think for us, we try and prevent it. So therefore, when it does happen to us, particularly in our personal lives or in alignment with our duty, it's really difficult for us to process it culturally.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a real difference there, isn't there, actually, when you think about it in that way. I know both of you have had experiences yourselves of bereavement and loss, and that's kind of where this conversation has come from, really. So are you both happy to share a little bit about your context? And yeah, are you okay to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I've had 2 significant bereavements over the last 12 months. My older brother died last May, and my mum died in February of this year. It was my mum that's had the biggest impact on me. She had Alzheimer's for 15 years and was comatose for 7. So my life of my normal, for want of a better expression, was going and visiting her every week in the care home, watching her being tended every 2 to 3 hours for 7 years in total. So when it came, I was expecting I would feel relief, and that didn't happen at all. and not many people that I was aware of could actually empathise with me in terms of the length of time. So, that ambiguous loss all the time. I grieved when she got diagnosed 15 years ago. I grieved when she went into the care home 9 years ago. And for the last 18 months, she was stopping breathing, stopping swallowing. So it was just a matter of time, and I thought I'd get that relief. It wasn't actually until 3 months after her death that my head came out of the sand, is the best way I can describe it. I just didn't want to deal with it. Everyone around me could see it wasn't me, and people, my managers. And this is one of the reasons why I'm doing it now, and I appreciate it's still quite raw for me. But that, for me, my managers could see that I wasn't my usual self, no matter how difficult the times had been, previously. But my, that saying of, oh, I'm fine, you say it often enough, you start to actually believe it. That's why I think, I'm doing this now, because I think it's important managers understand it's not about just asking someone, are you okay? It's actually listening to them.
And creating space for that conversation, I think, because how many times a day do people say, how are you? And we kind of go, yeah, I'm fine. And you can have, I remember vividly a couple of years ago, there was a lot going on for me in my life, and somebody said, how are you doing? And I went, yeah, I'm good, thanks, as I was signing in somewhere, and I knew this person. And I thought, I can't even begin to tell you what is actually going on at the minute, because it was not the right time. But there was loads I could have said. And we do that with bereavement and loss, and when we've lost somebody close, how do you start that conversation? You just, to me personally, I just didn't want to come across as being such a miserable, sad person, when actually I was a miserable, sad person. But people expect, me, oh, that's Sandy Powdrell, she's always got a smile on her face, and she likes to, she comes to work to enjoy herself, and I want enjoying life, never mind work. So that was all to do with grief and bereavement, and actually accepting it and doing something about it. And I think accepting sadness is really hard to do, isn't it? Because actually we don't allow ourselves to do that, and we can get on that hamster wheel of I'm fine. Put your mask on every day, you go into work, and you think you're being really productive, and that nobody's noticing, but actually it can be seeping out that sadness and kind of just loss of direction and feeling unhappy and upset, and that can be coming out in different ways that you don't even realise, I think, sometimes. Or the people, like you said, people you've worked with for a long time can maybe think, hang on a minute, something's not quite right there, but you'd probably keep going a lot longer unless someone actually said to you, I don't think you're okay.
And that's what it took for me. COVID and the pandemic gave me a perfect opportunity to forget about my mum. And I did that for 3 months until one of my managers said, we're really worried about you, and it was having that conversation. So it's them listening to me and being supportive. I think sometimes as a manager, when you've got a member of staff who's suffering with bereavement and has lost a loved one, that the person who's had the loss feels that they can't grieve, and the manager is actually scared to say to them, look, if you need time out, that's fine. If you need to take some annual leave, or if you want to go to your GP, depending on their circumstances, it's a part of life, isn't it, that we've all got to accept. It's going to happen, and it's learning to just learn to manage it and to cope with it. It's absolutely part of life. We all experience it, don't we? Either as we're getting, I think we were talking before we started recording about, as you get older, this starts to happen more. We start to lose our parents, and there's a generational shift, and I think within organisations as well, depending on the age of the workforce, depends on how that's going to happen, and that comes in waves sometimes as well. There can be quite a lot of people struggling at any one time. I think again, it's just that, to me, what helped with the manager, the advice I would always give is I can remember talking to other people where I said about my mum's got Alzheimer's and she's got a do not resuscitate order and I'm waiting for her to pass away, which is horrific. And I would get from other people, oh yeah, my grandma's like that, or my granddad's like that. And I wanted to scream at them, this is my mum, or mum, however you want to say it. You know, this is my mum I'm talking about. And it just felt so difficult that it is a case of don't try and sympathise, even don't try to empathise sometimes. It's just
listening, isn't it?
Learn to listen. You know, one of the things during this time that my husband's learned he's learned to listen. He really has. My husband's learned to listen, and I just...
So that's something positive that's come out.
Absolutely, and I'm all for looking for the silver lining. It has taken me to contact our employee assistance programme, and I've had 5 sessions of bereavement counselling, purely because I just, after a death and 3 months after a death, there was this void that I just didn't know how to fill. I didn't know what to do. And they helped me through it. And considering in my role I was the one who actually chose that tendering process, so I had to be very careful when I actually rang them and got that support in place, because I didn't want to tell them who I was, because I thought they might just give me that little bit better service. So, you know, I made a few things up. And the service they gave me was absolutely exemplary. It was brilliant. It really helped me.
Don't you think as well, being able to access that support at a time when it's ready for you and you can get it straight away?
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the key things. I know for me, it's, at Fortis, it's really important that we don't have waiting lists. I want people, if people have picked up the phone and said, I want to access some support, they need to be in.
Yeah.
Because the process has started. Whereas if you've got to wait, you know, weeks and weeks and weeks to access a service,
it's too late.
Yeah, you're left with it really, and you've already made a decision that you want some support. So
yeah, I rang them from my bed in the morning when no one else was around. They rang me an hour later, booked an appointment for later on in the afternoon, and I was talking to a counsellor by the afternoon.
Yeah, brilliant.
So yeah, I can strongly recommend it, and I appreciate there's a time and a place for telephone counselling.
Yeah.
And I've had both. I've had psychotherapy, I've had EMDR. You know, to then have this telephone counselling for bereavement. I think for me it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. Well, it's all part of what's on offer, isn't it? And you know, now actually as well, we've had to move everything online. So, you know, we're using different platforms, things that wouldn't have been available really, or people wouldn't have engaged with before. So I think telephone counselling, anything that helps really.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Keeping the Peace podcast, brought to you in partnership with Fortis Therapy and Training, Oscar Kilo and Humberside Police. Nancy, from your perspective, I know you started to tell me a little bit before what your story is.
So mine is very different than Sandy's, and mine, death I think comes in different forms, doesn't it? There's no one death that everybody experiences, and that's what it is. So I had a 10-year-old sister who was murdered walking home from junior school. And I grew up in the aftermath of her death. So if you like, my normal I get is really abnormal. And in that generation, you didn't talk about it. You just had to process it yourself. So I've not been one of these people who has reached out about it, but I've been very curious all the way through my sort of developmental years and then into adult life about not only why people do such horrendous acts, but also how do you survive and perform as a human being after that? Because you can imagine I see the ripple effects throughout my family, some dealing with it better than others. And for me, that instance doesn't end because I've had to attend parole board hearings where, you know, the offender, there's decisions to let him out of jail, those kind of things. And, you know, everybody who's lost anybody has birthdays and death days and Christmas days that you have to get through. That particular death day, because it's such a horrific death day, is just something I can't find the words to explain to somebody else. But when I take my personal experience and then I overlay it with my professional position, what I do find is if I meet people, I can tell if they've been through a trauma. There is something that I can sense in them.
It's like a sixth sense.
Yeah, and I also find that if people are struggling with difficult things to talk about, they'll come and talk to me about it. And part of me wanting to do that today and discuss it is because there will be somebody listening right now who feels really alone and really isolated by it. And just as Sandy said, people don't know how to talk about death. They don't know how to deal with you when you're upstairs they're upset, you know, they want to make you feel better and to stop crying and kind of patch you up, particularly in the police service, and move you on. And some things you don't just move on from. They change you fundamentally, who you are, and you have to work through what is a really difficult time period, regardless of how that death has occurred, whether it's a family member, whether it's a child, etc. You know, there are all different types of that. And there are ones which I would call a natural death. So when my father died, he was an elderly man who had a heart attack. You know, he'd had something horrible happen in his life, the loss of a child, but he'd had a good life as well. And I could rationally, cognitively deal with that in a way that I think most people could process. It's horribly sad, but you love your dad. The love never goes, and things move on, and you still miss them. The other death of my sister, I will never make peace with that because it is just so abnormal. How do you try and normalise that? But I don't do this for sympathy because I have a great life, but I just want someone who's listening to this who feels alone at maybe 2 a.m. when they're listening to it to think, do you know, there was one thing that they said in that podcast that helps me right now, and that's all I want to do, is to give back. Equally in my professional life as a manager, I've had 2 people who have worked for me in service who've died at a very young age. And having to process that both for individuals, for their family, their line managers, co-workers, etc., just to share a little bit of what my learning has been around that, and to make people feel it's okay to talk with someone who's really upset about something.
And I think those personal experiences you both described, they are something that they're your personal experiences, as you said, but it informs how you then can recognise those signs in others. You can empathise, you know, and also that you know it's an individual experience. You know, nobody's going to go through this in the same way, and it's messy, isn't it? Whether you've just lost somebody, whether you've lost them 10 years ago, whether you've grown up in the aftermath of that, as you've just described. It's just messy emotions, and it can feel, I think, very isolating because it is so individual. You know, people can say, oh yeah, I felt a bit like that, or I get that, but I don't really get it.
No, we were talking like in the beginning, it's really raw, it's like a really punch in the stomach kind of feeling. But I was just saying to Sandy, for me, it's a little bit like motion sickness. I never know when I'm going to get it, and it just hits you like a wave that you have a very physical, emotional and mental reaction to, and then it just passes. And someone may not know they've said something that triggered you to 3, 2, 1, out of the room you go, you have a little thought process, and then you come back in the room, you're still the same person, but you have physically and emotionally and mentally reacted to something in a way that they will never know. You know, there's certain keywords that are triggers, you know, that just push you, and then you come back again.
And it can be anything, can't it? It can be keywords, it can be aromas, it can be music, it can be all these things that kind of, you know, or you hear something on the radio, or you know, you listen to a podcast and someone says something, you think, oh God, that really, it's like a sucker punch, and you think, God, I've got to think about that, or I want to avoid that and come away from it.
Well, we both said that if someone's chosen to click on this, it's because they need to do something about what they're feeling at the time. And we both talked about the delaying tactics we've both used to distract, because I don't want to feel all of that. And I described mine as a pressure cooker. So as long as I can keep the lid on, occasionally it rattles, I take a couple of scoops out the top, but I'm not going to the bottom of that pan, because there is nothing good for me at the bottom of that pan. And ultimately I can't get the answers that I want to get. So it's how do I be a functioning adult? And if people saw me in my professional life, they'd never think anything, you know, that I was carrying this, you know, around. But that's where you don't know what's going on for somebody.
And I think sometimes, I mean, obviously I'm a therapist, so I would, you know, a lot of people will come and talk, and we do go into those things that feel really difficult and uncomfortable, and that's part of the process. But not everybody needs to do that.
No.
Because you don't need to always, you know, it's the same thing with abuse, it's the same thing with all these kind of traumatic events. We don't have to relive them in order to be able to come to terms, to be able to manage. You're right, there's going to be waves at time, there's going to be occasions where you feel overwhelmed by this emotion, and you know, kind of knocks you off your feet, and then it goes away sometimes as quickly as it's appeared. But being able to learn techniques around distraction and just taking your head away from it, because sometimes you need a break, don't you?
It's just, to me, it's so it's still quite raw for me, but it's about processing it, you know, and knowing to me there's a time and a place. So, you know, at the very beginnings I would wake up in the morning and remember, and it would upset me. Now I don't even, you know, you get to a stage, and I think it's fair to say, so anyone listening to this, is that you've just got to go with the flow of it. And so many people said to me, when, you know, within the first 3 months of her passing away, that it's just like a roller coaster. It will come in waves.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, yeah, it does, but when does the tsunami stop?
Yeah.
When does the waves start to actually calm down? And how do you get it to calm down? Yeah. Sometimes I think without that support, it won't necessarily calm down.
No.
And I've heard other people say, well, if you're still grieving a year after they've passed away, then you need that support. I think actually it's a personal thing. I've been grieving my mum 9 years.
Yeah, I think it's how open you are to that. So I'm at the other spectrum. I've got a really be strong driver that's off the Richter scale, that's probably typical of the police station, and I will choose when I talk about this and with whom I talk, and it's very infrequent. And I've got to say, I've never met anybody who's got any similarity to my personal circumstances. So one of the things I find quite hard is that there's nobody like me who understands what I have gone through, and that's not in a self-centered way, but I just think for people who are listening out there, that there is that thing that's what helps make you feel more alone. And it is harder because you can't, if someone's broken their leg, you can ask anybody about it and they can tell you how their leg got broken, how they fixed it, how long it took, etc. This kind of break-in doesn't have that logical process to it. And because people, I think, are so frightened about being vulnerable and to risk losing control, because you start crying and all those kind of things, it's very difficult to bring up. And I think for my response, my friend of mine says I intellectualise emotional issues, which I know isn't a word, but I want to think my way out of it. I don't necessarily want to feel my way out of it. Now, I've had overwhelming feel situations, because you know what, going into a parole board hearing where the press are waiting for you, he's going to be in the room, I have been saturated with feel, and particularly with fear. And that is for me why it's just like, I've had that, I really don't like being in that place. So I choose as a strategy to do that. Whether that's right or wrong, it kind of works for me, and it's the way I've grown up doing it. I'm not saying that's the right way either, because equally, if someone comes to me, I'm really comfortable if someone comes to me and has tears, because they've done studies about tears, and stress tears are made up of something completely different than distress tears. Well, there's a reason we've evolved that way. It's a natural way to get rid of stress out of the body. So I'm really comfortable with people sat crying. I can sit with them and then sit for however long it takes for them to do that. But I think you need to let them do that if that's what they need to do.
And I think we need to allow ourselves to do that as well, because we can stop ourselves, can't we? Really, we kind of go, oh God, I feel upset about that, and I come away, and yeah, exactly. And we kind of avoid going into those emotions because we feel like there might be feelings about being weak or being seen to be vulnerable, or not capable, or whatever. And actually, it's a natural part of our responses. And that tsunami you were describing there, that there might be a tsunami that's happening for several months, and then it starts to become something that's a bit less intense, but it's still there. And we go backwards and forwards. So you might take a step forward and you take 2 steps back. I think that's the other thing, that, well, it's like you said, it's been a year.
But I think you can have a physical response to it. So I know if my body does not want to talk about this, it tries to shut me down. And it's a really bizarre way, because even though we're recording today and it must be the hottest day of the year, it's about 25, 30 degrees.
We can't have the fan on because we're recording.
If my body says I don't want to talk about this emotionally, it actually makes me go cold, and my teeth will physically chatter, even on a day like today, because my normal response is, if I've been out for a dog walk and I'm really cold, I either get in the bath or I get in the bed and I go to sleep, and that stops the need to talk about it. So it's literally like my body just says, nope, we're not doing this. I'm going to physically stop you. I will start teeth chattering, and then eventually it starts to block my throat and my ability to swallow. And it's something, as I've noticed, as I've got older, and just thought that is really bizarre as a physiological, but I understand intellectually that my body's just saying, we're not going through that trauma. I am closing down, you're going on to snooze.
And sleeping, actually, I mean, it's there for a reason. We want to cut out, and often, when we talk about feeling depressed or low, we sleep. Because we need to recover, and it just stops our brain, it stops us overthinking, because you're right, that intellectual side of it, we have that, but it can help us, but it can also hinder us, and get in the way of us processing what's happening emotionally. So being able to cut out sometimes, whatever that is, whether it's going for a sleep or whether it's going for a walk or it's doing something else. Years ago, I suffered with trauma, and I used to just swim, because no one could talk to me. I could just do, lap after lap after lap, and it was process time, and I could just get into that state of kind of coming away from what was going on for me emotionally, and it was physically tiring as well, and emotionally I'd got myself through it by the time I got out of the pool. So you find your way, don't you, with what works for you, and it is very specific, I think. And then you don't always know what works for you until
you do it.
Until you do it.
For me, it's Zumba.
Yeah.
Dancing.
Okay. Yeah.
In exactly the same way.
I would just get that wrong.
It's tiring. It's fun.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you can do the dance moves or not.
No.
And that, it gives you that headspace. And say, just from a work point of view, being away from work for a period of time gives you that headspace, gives you that chance just to, how can I put it? Just to process what's happened and accept, actually, you what I find and what I've seen in other people as well, especially when I've been as a manager, and I've in my professional life, some of the people I've had to support from people services when they've got terminal illnesses, and you get to know them, you get to know their families, and then when they pass away, it would still upset me because I am a crier. I don't think I've ever been to a funeral where I've not cried. And I've been to a lot of funerals because I've been here for a long time, and a lot of people have died, unfortunately. But going into, sorry, I forgot where I was coming. But going into, actually, when someone's passed away and it's personal, I found what I was doing that I wasn't expected to do. I thought I would fall apart. I thought I would just cry because I'm a crier. And I thought life would just then carry on. But what happened with for me, and what I've seen in other people, is that actually you just put it on a shelf and you carry on as normal, thinking it's normal. I've seen it where I've been managing other people where they've lost their parents, and they've said, I want to come back next week. I've been off a week, I want to come back next week, and they haven't even had the funeral. And I've said, no, you're not coming back. You can work from home if you want to, but I don't think it's the right thing for you to come back. And they haven't always appreciated that, because then I'd stay in touch with them, making sure they're not alone, that they have got that support there. And then when they reflect later on, they say, I'm glad you stopped me from coming in, because, I needed that support, but coming into the workplace, everyone feels sorry for you, you feel like you're the focus.
Like getting stared at.
You're getting
with
stared
Bambi
at.
eyes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awful.
No,
I
I know.
can't stand that. And I
don't
feel,
do that.
Yeah, that's not helpful.
You'd said, Nancy, that you've got this bucket and you haven't gone to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
I actually feel like I've gone to the bottom of it, and I've actually poked a hole in it,
Yeah.
because it's took for it to leak for me to be able to move on, because it's gone on for that long.
I think the key word there is normal. So when you've had a bereavement, nothing is normal. And people talk about, when it goes back to normal. Well, you don't have, you have a new normal. You go through something very abnormal, and then you create a new normal. And as human beings, I think we crave that routine, don't we? So that's why people say, I want to get back to work, or I want to organise the funeral. And you get into all those kind of ritual things that you do. But you find yourself stood in the aisle picking toothpaste. And having this random out-of-body experience where you look at everybody like, why is the world still going on?
Why are you all carrying on walking around
when
me?
my life has just got shattered? And that's when I think you've got to recognise that there is some good routine that you do need to have, and you do need to have some time when you process it, and everybody's different. And I guess my plea to line managers who are sat listening to this is, your staff are all going to do this differently. And there is no right way or wrong way. And it's not you've had 2 weeks bereavement leave and then you come back and everything's normal and you're back to tickety-boo. Because that's not the case. Processing and getting to the funeral, for me, I think is the easiest bit, because you're in shock and you're transactionally dealing with something.
You've got a task, you've got a job to do.
The bereavement starts for me after the funeral.
Yeah, I mean, we're in COVID-19 territory at the minute, and obviously people haven't been able to do those processes in the way that we would expect to.
And you can't give anybody a hug right now.
No.
So someone's had some, which, I've got to say I'm in two minds about, because when you're coming back and someone hugs you and gives you Bambi eyes, it doesn't help because the waterworks start. Yeah. But equally, there is that thing of humanity that you want to show somebody I care.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to somebody recently who'd lost a friend over lockdown, and he'd gone to the funeral for this person. Obviously, there was only, I think, 10 people allowed in at that point. So there was a lot of people. They were in the churchyard and they were kind of stood outside. and there were people live streaming it, and there was quite a lot of anger that somebody was doing that, and actually somebody was doing that because a lot of people couldn't come to the funeral, and but there wasn't any of that physical touch. There wasn't the usual kind of, you know, kind of getting hold of somebody and just saying, are you okay? And we're disabled with that, you know. We do like that. We're social beings, and you know, some people will say, well, that's my worst nightmare, I'm quite happy for people to stay away, but generally speaking, we want that kind of connection with other people.
I know 2 people who've lost people in the police family where there's been a police funeral, and both families have asked for the event to be recorded, because when they were in it, they couldn't see it. They were just, but they wanted to be able to keep it not only for them, and a particular couple of them were young women, but to be able to show it to their kids, to say, this is how much your grandmother, who's not now here, was respected. And as they said, you know, they just were through streams of tears, but afterwards they could see the people who were there at the event that they hadn't seen. And so I think what we view as normal in terms of, you know, Victorian images of wear black and you know, all of that, so now is very different. We grieve in different ways.
And in a way that has helped us to recognise that, hasn't it? Because we have had to, over these last few months really, to grieve in different ways, and whether that's felt okay or not, it's just different to what we've done before. And I think that kind of idea of what is normal puts people under a lot of pressure. It's quite oppressive really, because we feel like we've got to do something in a particular way, and if it doesn't fit for you and that's not what works for you, that's not going to help you.
Well, we were talking about, you know, you have the humour, don't you, after a death, the immediate, that, you know, they call it dark humour, but it's part of your stress release.
And the giggling, get quite a bit of hysteria sometimes.
When you're talking about crazy things that these people have done in their lives, etc. But then after that, and sort of after the funeral, we were both talking about that first time when you feel happy following their death, and then you feel guilty for feeling happy again. And it's just this real complex world that you have got to go through to come out to a new version of normality for you.
I say I'm happy to share, you know, when you talk about what's normal, I don't think I'm normal in any shape or form, and I wouldn't want to be quite frank with you.
Me either, I'm with you.
what I will share with the listeners as well is whatever works for you when you're going through that grief is just right for you. So some of the things I did, and this is where you might think I'm a complete weirdo here, and I don't care because I'm going to share it, is that when I went to see my mum in the rest home, and I took a photograph of her, you know, because I wanted a photograph. See, I'm getting upset, but
that's okay.
But it was the right thing for me to do.
If you're not going to get upset now, when are you?
Exactly. And I also, I kept her eulogy. I've got it as an email. I proofread the actual service, you know, they put pictures on of her, and it was a humanist one. She wasn't religious in any shape or form. But me and my brother, the day, actually it was about 3 days after her death, I got him to sit with me and I typed up a eulogy. We did it together. There was no way we could have spoken, so we got a humanist to actually to say it. And we made sure we got the craziest woman we could find, because my mum loved crazy. And you know, the music, it was a case of, there was some of the music we chose was very personal, and at the end of it, one of the final song that we played was Meatloaf, Paradise by the Dashboard Light. This is to an 88-year-old who's had Alzheimer's for 15 years. Now, people who knew my mum, who were there, would know that she used to sing that all the time, you know, and it was part of the eulogy, and it was the right thing for us to do. So even if, and no one did say, oh, that's not appropriate, all I did have to forewarn her 91-year-old brother, look, you know, Uncle Les, we're going to be playing this record and it's quite rocky, you know, as we're putting daffodils on a basket. So, but it's the right things to do. So, you know, I've got that eulogy, and my 2 children who were adults, you know, late teens and early 20s, they came obviously to the funeral, and I've kept it though for when, as they get older, if they say, what did we say, can you remember? You know, it's there just to share later on. And I don't know, some of the
I'm
music.
going to come in there with you because my family are farming background, so we put my dad's wellies in with him in the casket. So the Tony Robbins of the future, when they dig the fire wells, that wasn't the only object either. I mean, he must have weighed another 4 stone heavier than my dad did.
But
like
I've got a combined harvester.
Yeah, the tractor didn't quite fit. I too went to the care home, and I've got to say, if people are brave enough, it's probably one of the best things I did. And I went and I was with my dad, and I sat and talked to him, and I said everything I wanted to say to him. And bizarrely, I'd held his hand that long that he got warm again. Yeah. And this is when you know your mind is playing tricks on you, because he felt like he was warm. So I was like, well, he can't be dead because he's warm. And actually, it was just the heat from my hand because I'd held it so long. And that's when you just know that you are in a different place when you're going through acute bereavement. But don't worry. I think probably every family is actually quite eccentric deep down. It's just whether you know it or not.
And it's, and it's okay though. It's okay to go through that and do. You know, it's a bit, to me, it's a bit like with weddings. When you're getting married, you feel like you've got to try and please everybody, right? Well, the best thing I would say, having gone through the experiences I now have, is
do what you want.
You do it what you want. You do what you think your loved one would want you to do, you know, and what feels right for you.
I remember someone saying to me that funerals are about the living, and I didn't know what that meant until I kind of went through it. And it's actually about making those people in the congregation feel better about the deceased at the front of the
It's a process for them, isn't it? It's a process for us to actually be able to say goodbye to somebody and say what we want to say and have a safe place to grieve, I suppose.
And I think you celebrate that individual, what they meant to you, because Sandy and I were talking earlier about coming in and we were saying about, you know, what happens if you get upset. And I said, well, the problem with death is actually all about love. Because you love these people, when you lose them, it hurts. And would you rather have a life where you had no love in it? And that's the problem. You do love them, you do care about them, and therefore there's a cost to that when they're not there. And that's the difficulty. But would you want a loveless life?
If we had got the listener in tears now, then we never will.
Somewhere in one mad sentence or another, probably not the one about the wellies, but somebody will say, I got that and I wasn't alone and someone else, because you know, it'll be 2 a.m. and you're listening to this podcast by yourself in the dark somewhere, won't it?
But I think it's one of those, I was trying to be very proactive because I'm quite a be-strong character as well. And I can remember listening to podcasts on a night time because I want sleep in. And a lot of them were really quite trying to be uplifting. You know, I was listening to meditation and just listening to some counselling tapes. And I got to the stage I was just angry about it. So, you know, you've got to do it when it's right for you.
You do, and I think it's what works for you, because you know, you might have found something that really works for you but wouldn't work for me. And I think it's accepting that, you know, when you're working in an organisation like this, I think a lot of people who work in the police have a be strong driver, you know. That's part of what you're here to do, is to be strong for people who are out there who need you, as you said, to protect or fix or rescue, whatever, however you're seen. And to actually say, as someone who's supposed to be strong, I'm not feeling strong at the moment, is quite a tough thing to do. And also for, you know, teams and managers and leaders to recognise when someone's not in that place and to have a conversation about that is also hard to do, because, you know, you're there to be strong. That's what you're there to be.
And I think part of it, as growing up as an adult, what the challenge is how you work out to say, I'm not okay. So a crab on its back is more comfortable than me asking for help. So I have to work out, as a be strong person, how do I tell somebody I'm not okay and how do I ask for help? And because of the way I'm designed, it has to be on my terms. So if someone says to me, are you okay? And I just think, I can't be bothered to talk to you, or you are the last person on the planet I want to talk to, I will just deflect them. And I'm skillful enough that I can just deflect them, even if I'm having a dreadful day. But what I need to do is find a way that I can get to somebody, a little bit like what you said, I needed to pick up the phone and ring somebody at that time of day. There are people that you need to find out, and you need to work out what works for you, because nobody can teach you this. But I guess what I would then implore managers to do is, just because you found a way doesn't mean that it works for somebody else.
It's not the right way for everybody.
And if I was to give one person a piece of advice, if you've got someone who walks in bereaved, is don't judge, don't say, just sit and listen. They'll tell you. And then try and
time,
hear what they are telling you and hear what they're not telling you.
I think it is. It's the subtext, isn't it, to what's going on as well, and all the other non-verbal cues and everything else that you can see. I think it's trusting your gut feeling. We have a human response to other people, and actually recognising that this person isn't okay, but I don't really know why. that I can clearly see, and giving space to time and talk about that.
And it's also about treating me like I was Nancy before. So, you know, that Bambi eyes thing really don't work for me.
Don't for me either.
And, you know, all it does is keep me upset and whatever. And actually, what I might want is I might want a bit of that, but I want you to treat me like normal.
Like you know me.
Yeah, because I'm still me. And I think you see this with people who cross the road who want to pretend they haven't seen you. And all, well, you know, just when you've had a death. Now, you know, for my colleagues who are going to the homes of victims where they've had someone killed in traumatic situation, etc., please kind of take that learning with you when you go in there, because they feel doubly isolated. I know in my family's experience, it was almost like we were unlucky to be around, so people avoided us even more, which makes you even more isolated. And you know, you're the one, and if it becomes public, then it's even worse, because like everybody's staring and pointing at you, etc. And it's the only thing your surname becomes known for. So there is something for me about recognise and be the human that reaches out. Don't leave them on their own, even if you're dropping food round for them and they don't want to talk. It's just the fact that I was thinking of you.
It's a nurturing part, isn't it? You're nurturing someone and like you say, you drop food around with somebody, you're just recognising that you're showing that you're there if you need them, and and you care. I think the other thing as well is knowing who not to talk to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because there are mood hoovers.
Yep.
There are people who love to be
drama.
love to be in the drama, love to be needed, and
pour some petrol on it.
The Bambi eyes thing about but you don't you want to talk, and actually sometimes it's recognising who doesn't help you.
Yeah, definitely. I think you tend to. I certainly have found out who my real friends are.
Yeah.
I didn't really need to calculate or work that out. I think I already knew. But yeah,
be acutely in focus when you need support.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you don't need your mates when you've won the lottery, do you?
No.
It's at the difficult end of the scheme where you need people to step up, and people either do step up or they don't know how to step up.
That tells you so much, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I guess, one of the things we've not sort of talked about is when, and I've had it a couple of times now, where people are in a terminal illness case and work with you or work for you. And that's quite difficult when, who do they talk to? Because quite often they don't want to talk to their family because it upsets them. So they may come to you as a line manager, and I've had people say, will you take care of my will for me? Will you ensure that, the funeral? I've sat with someone whilst they organised their own funeral about what they did and they didn't want. I had one lady who thankfully has made a full recovery from cancer, but thought that she was in a life-limiting situation. And we sat and talked about what she wanted for her children, etc. She even actually asked me if I'd marry her husband, bizarrely, because she said he would need someone to tell him what to do. So I declined at that point, and I thought perhaps he would make his own choice on that. But thankfully, it never came to that event. But you do have these, you do have these bizarre conversations. But if you can't sit with somebody during that time, when can you? And they need someone to talk honestly with them. And I think you've got to let people do that.
I think as well, those conversations are really hard to have with people who are in your family. To go and find somebody who is connected to you but doesn't have that emotional. I don't know, connection, I suppose, where you can almost voice it and work it through for yourself. Because even if the worst case scenario doesn't happen, then you've had that thought process, and it's almost like I've got my affairs in order. And I think that is something that people feel a lot better for having done that. There's less ambiguity. Things feel like they're organised, and I can now focus on what I've got to do here. Thank you for talking about all of that. We've covered a lot of ground there. Is there anything, just before we finish, is there anything in terms of kind of tips that you want to leave people with? We've talked about talking to the right people.
So you say, talk to the right people, do what feels right for you. Acknowledge that you are not superhuman, that grief is a natural part of living. And you can't be superwoman, superman. You just be aware that when you're going through this process, identify who the people are who you can go and talk to, and get the support at the right time. Do what's right for you, and don't be ashamed. Don't be embarrassed by it. Don't you don't have to be strong all the time. My smiles come back on. You will get through it. It'll take time, but everyone, you will eventually get through it. But if you're listening to it now, get some support. get the help that you need, however you feel would work for you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So I guess my one thing, if I had to boil it down, is we all have what I call the dark night of the soul, where it's always at 3 a.m. when all your mates are asleep, you don't want to wake anybody up, and you think that this is just awful. The one thing I would say to people is, I think it's normal to have that feeling where you feel so utterly wretched that your mind will take you to places where you think this would just be so much better if I didn't wake up tomorrow. And my advice to people, or my plea to people under that is a momentary thought process. Do not stay in that place. Do whatever it takes to get yourself through the next 60 seconds, 5 minutes, 30 minutes. Because afterwards you do realise that was a real dark moment of the soul when you were alone at the worst time of the day. And that is, you have just got to keep going. Promise me that you will see that sunrise, and then think about it again.
I really echo that. I think sometimes when you're feeling those desperate feelings and those intrusive thoughts, and you start to kind of go down that rabbit hole, that actually it doesn't last. It feels like it's going to last forever.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, and it's having faith that actually time does help, and that this won't last. This feeling won't last.
Yeah.
It's almost like having mantras. This is just where I'm at today, and it'll go. And
it's having those mantras, like you say. And also to me is, would your loved one want you to be in that dark place, forever?
Yeah.
They just wouldn't. They would want you to get through this.
And I think 3 o'clock in the morning is very difficult because everything seems much, much worse, whatever it is, I think. But knowing what works for you in order to kind of help you put one foot in front of the other. So what is it that I need to do to help myself feel a bit better than I do right now? And that might be something really simple, but there are things people can do, aren't there, that can help them to lift out of that very dark, desperate place. And also there's lots of help out there that's available, and there are people who can support as well, lots of national helplines and things that people can access to at 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
So even if it feels like it's 4 a.m. and no one's interested, actually there is somebody who's interested, and there's somebody there who'll take that call.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Keeping the Peace podcast. It's available wherever you listen to your podcasts, and if you subscribe, you'll be notified of the next episode as soon as it's available. We'd love to hear your feedback and ideas for future podcasts, so please do comment or get in touch on our social media platforms for either Fortis Therapy and Training or Oscar Kilo.